Whenever you look at a news headline about the national budget, have you ever stopped and wondered, why do government budgets always seem to grow? Seriously, no matter what year it is, no matter how the economy is doing, the government's checkbook just constantly expands. Why is that? Well, today we're going to decode the logic behind how, why, and exactly where governments are spending your money.
Welcome to this explainer. I am super excited to take you through this. We hear a lot of noise and, frankly, a lot of politics about government spending. But today, we're setting all that aside. We're going to look strictly at the facts, the frameworks, and the data to understand the true engine of the modern state, public expenditure. All right, let's quickly pull up our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the government checkbook, classifying expenditure, understanding Wagner's law, the limits of that law, and finally, the real-world impact of all this spending. Okay, let's dive right into Section 1, the government checkbook. Let's lay down the basics. What exactly is public expenditure? Basically, it's the financial fuel for the modern welfare state. It is any spending by a government authority, whether that's central, state, or local. But it's not just, spending for the sake of spending. It's money specifically directed toward providing goods, services, infrastructure, welfare, security, and overall economic management. And in modern times, the sheer size and scope of this spending has skyrocketed, simply because we expect the state to do a lot more than it used to.
Now, there's this really fascinating concept to keep in mind as we go through this. Public expenditure is the mirror of government intention. Just think about that for a second. You can listen to political speeches all day long, but if you want to know what a country truly values, its real economic and social goals, you literally just have to look at where it puts its money. The budget absolutely never lies.
Moving on to Section 2, classifying public expenditure. To wrap our heads around this massive checkbook, economists divide all the spending into specific categories. First up, we've got the classic split, revenue expenditure versus capital expenditure. Revenue expenditure is basically the cost of keeping the lights on, right? It's the day-to-day functioning of the government, paying salaries to public servants, handing out pensions, managing subsidies. Capital expenditure, on the other hand, is all about building for the future. It's the creation of hard assets that will pay off long-term, like constructing massive new highways, building schools, and developing irrigation projects. But hey, not all spending is created equal. And that brings us to productive versus unproductive expenditure. Productive expenditure actively contributes to economic growth. Think of investments in skill training or education that literally build a better, sharper workforce. Unproductive expenditure? Well, that doesn't directly contribute to production at all. We're talking about things like the upkeep of ceremonial royal palaces, or most notably, the astronomical costs of war and conflict. It's essentially a heavy drain that siphons resources away without building any real economic capital. We can also look at who actually gets the money, especially when we talk about grants. Progressive grants are designed to disproportionately benefit the poorer sections of society, actively helping to shrink the income gap. A perfect example would be something like the PMAY housing scheme for the poor in India. Conversely, regressive grants actually widen that income gap by benefiting the rich or upper-income groups more than the poor, like tax subsidies for luxury goods industries or giving massive grants to elite institutions that are mostly accessed by the wealthy. All right, Part 3, Understanding Wagner's Law. So, now that we know how to categorize the cash, why does the budget just keep getting bigger and bigger? Well, here's the real plot twist of our explainer. Way back in 1883, a German economist named Adolf Wagner formulated what we now call the law of increasing public expenditures. He proposed that as an economy grows, public expenditure increases not just in total absolute numbers, but actually as a proportion of national income. Essentially, as a society progresses and modernizes, the state naturally has to take on vastly more complex roles. The math behind this is actually pretty brilliant. Imagine in year 1, your national income is 1,000 crores, and your public expenditure is 100 crores. That's 10%. But by year 3, your national income has tripled to 3,000 crores. According to Wagner, the public expenditure doesn't just triple, it jumps way higher, say to 450 crores, bumping the ratio up to 15% of the national income. Let that sink in for a second. While the national income increased by 3 times, the public expenditure grew by a staggering 4.5 times. The ratio of spending to income inherently rises over time. It's built into the system. So why exactly does this happen?
Wagner basically outlined a perfect storm of functional necessities that drive this growth. As we evolve, we naturally demand better healthcare and education. Massive urbanization requires huge investments in civic amenities. Think billion-dollar metro rail projects. Plus, as nations modernize, maintaining peace, upgrading defense with things like cybersecurity, and managing complex systems like digital taxation, well, it all becomes vastly more expensive. Bureaucracy rarely gets cheaper, right? Add in population growth and inflation, and the cost of public services just naturally skyrockets.
Let's shift gears to Section 4, the limits of Wagner's law.
Because, economics is rarely flawless, right? Wagner's 1883 theory definitely has some blind spots. First off, it completely ignores short-run crises. I mean, think of the COVID-19 pandemic. Government spending spiked massively, completely independent of national income growth. Second, it neglects political factors. Actually, it assumes spending just naturally grows, completely ignoring things like election cycles or differing political ideologies. It also assumes governments just always have the fiscal space to keep spending, which ignores harsh realities like national debt and revenue constraints. And finally, it totally overlooks the fact that technological efficiency, like digital governance, can sometimes make public services a whole lot cheaper, not more expensive.
And finally, Section 5, the impact of spending.
So what's the so what here? What does all this cash actually achieve out in the real world? Well, in a modern mixed economy, public expenditure isn't just a financial obligation, it's an active, dynamic response system to drive development. If a country has underdeveloped infrastructure, the government responds with heavy capital expenditure on roads and rail, like the PM Gaudi Shakti or Bharat Mala projects. If agricultural productivity is lagging, funds are deployed for irrigation and rural R&D. If human capital needs a boost, spending pivots to sweeping health and education policies to build a healthier, more skilled workforce.
But it's not just about pouring concrete. Public expenditure is also a primary tool for job creation, and different types of joblessness require totally different targeted spending. To combat rural unemployment, governments fund massive public works programs that guarantee labor, like MGNREGA. To tackle youth unemployment, capital is rapidly injected into innovation and the digital economy through things like Startup India. And for urban joblessness, the checkbook opens for targeted skill training and MSME support. The money is literally used as a catalyst to force job creation across different sectors.
And lastly, and honestly maybe most importantly, public spending acts as a giant bridge to reduce inequality and promote social inclusion. Where there's a gap in education access, government funds step in with subsidized schooling and initiatives like the midday meal scheme to ensure kids are actually fed and taught. Healthcare inequality met with free public health services. And what about direct income inequality? That's tackled head-on with direct income support programs like PM Kisan, moving money right into the hands of the households that needed the absolute most.
Which brings us right back to the ultimate question. We've seen that government budgets will naturally grow as society evolves. Wagner taught us that for sure. But as you look at your own nation's budget today, you really have to ask yourself, is your country's public expenditure efficiently driving development, building real assets, and reducing inequality? Or is it simply expanding the sheer size of the government through unproductive, regressive spending? Remember, it's your money in that checkbook. How well is it being spent? Thanks so much for watching this explainer and keep asking the right questions.